Welcome to The Digital Forge, the podcast where we explore how technology, innovation, and people are reshaping manufacturing and industry for the future. Today, I'm joined by Tim Craggs, CEO and founder of Exciting Instruments Limited. Tim is a University of Sheffield spin-out founder who's leading a company that has created a breakthrough tool for studying single molecules. Traditionally, scientists needed huge, incredibly expensive equipment in specialist labs, but Exciting Instruments has developed a tabletop device that makes single molecule research accessible to labs everywhere, what Tim calls democratizing single molecule research. The potential applications are extraordinary, from accelerating drug discovery and biotech innovation to environmental testing to detecting diseases like cancer and Parkinson's at the very earliest stages. In this conversation, we'll talk about the journey from academic lab to commercial success, scaling a hard tech company, Sheffield's role in fostering innovation, and the personal sacrifices Tim made, including collateralizing his house to get the business off the ground. So let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Tim Craggs. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks for having me.
So let's just go through your sort of background. Where were you born? What was your sort of academic history and so on? What were you interested in as a kid?
Absolutely. So I was born in Southampton, 1980. There we go. Age myself straight away. And son of a teacher and a doctor. So a chemistry teacher, and I think that love of science sort of came very much from an early age, from chemistry sets that my dad bought me and growing crystals. I've got a very specific memory of, growing crystals and taking them into school and being super proud of these, these copper sulfate, probably it was bright blue sort of things, things like that. It was really, really excellent. And then, so was in Southampton for all of my sort of education, 5 to 18. In comprehensive sort of normal state school sort of stuff, and then was lucky enough to get a place at Cambridge. So from there, that was then my undergrad and PhD there, which we'll get into in a bit. And I guess as growing up, I was very into my music, classical music particularly. So I did a lot of violin playing. I had to make a decision probably around 12, when I was 12 or 13, whether I wanted to take that really seriously and focus more solely on that, as people do, doing 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 hours of practice a day and becoming professional, or not. And I was just like, there was just too many things I was interested in, and that's never stopped. I think that that thing, and for me as well, I think I really enjoyed the social aspect of that. I loved playing in an orchestra and things like that. I was less in love just with the instrument and practice. And I think if you're going to be a professional player, you've just got to love locking yourself in a room and being with your instrument for 10 hours a day. So that was not me.
How far did you get with the music?
At various points I played professionally. So we've had string quartets that we've done lots of wedding gigs and other bits and bobs. So we funded the last year of my PhD with my violin playing, for example.
Wow.
So I was doing a lot of gigging in London. Cambridge to London's 45 minutes on the train. So I do gigs in London for professional orchestras and things like that. So I've done a lot of... I can play the violin, right?
I would say so. Which orchestras have you played with then?
So a bunch. Too many but a bunch of different bits and bobs, but also the singing as well. So I met my wife actually as part of a chapel choir in Cambridge. So we did a lot of that, but actually I think that some of that shaped, in fact, the orchestra side. So I ran one of the orchestras in Cambridge when I was an undergraduate there, Cambridge University Symphony Orchestra. I was initially treasurer of and then chair, and I kind of took them on their first international tour. I took them from rehearsing in a back room of one college to being front and centre in the music centre and school in Cambridge. And so I think that we raised a whole bunch of money for them in terms of, I could see already the beginnings of an entrepreneurial type of approach, of not being satisfied, I guess, with the status quo and wanting to take something from close to nothing to something bigger and better.
So obviously you found music easy, or you found you were good at music. Did you find the same with science? Was that something that you could just do?
I think there's always this balance between kind of what native talent, and then and practice and crafting honing your craft, right? And I think that you have to hone your craft. I think that for me, I was lucky in that there were lots of things I was good at, and it was just so I had a choice, and in some ways that was hard because I was like, well, I like all of these things. So how am I going to choose what I do? I think that I didn't particularly like writing essays. So that for me kind of ruled out. Initially, I thought when I was in year 9, I guess, or something like that, I was dead set that I wanted to be a lawyer. I was reading a load of John Grisham, and do you know what I mean? It was like, oh, I'm going to be a barrister. I'm going to, it was that. And then and whether there was some parental influence there or not, or whatever else, it wasn't a world they knew necessarily. So for me, it became down a bit more of a decision between sort of being a medical doctor or going down the more science road. And actually the decision there for me was more around, it was a personal choice. I really like being around people. I thrive on interaction. Everything I do is very multidisciplinary. It's very collaborative. And I guess that the thing that I thought about when I was debating this with my mum and with my dad as doctor and scientist, effectively, that when you're a doctor, you're dealing with people who are ill. And that's kind of the job. And that's a fabulous job, and it's a brilliant and incredibly important profession. And some of what we're doing is going to help some of that, I think, now, which is brilliant as well. But I'd rather be, personally, I think I have more to add when I'm around people when they're at the top of their game, rather than, when they're not. And for me, that was rather crassly, I guess, but that certainly fed into my thinking. I think the other thing which is interesting, doctoring is very empirical, and my mum would say, I would say, well, how does that work? And she's like, well, I don't know, but I know that it does, and it saves someone's life, and so I do it. Yeah. And it's like, but that, for me, that was never enough. I wanted to know at a molecular level, how does that drug, what is actually happening? Yeah. And so for me, that was more the conversation. It was all these things together, but that's really what took me into science.
That's interesting. So you had a need to understand how things work, not just taking for granted that they do. So your undergrad and your doc at Cambridge, what were you studying?
Yeah, so So the undergraduate science in Cambridge is nice because it's what they call natural sciences, and so you effectively choose 3 experimental subjects, and everyone does some maths in the first year, and that was great because we've kind of covered a little bit of this. I don't like choosing really. I like to do everything, so that allowed me to do physics, chemistry and sort of cellular biology in my first year. And the course is amazing because I was effectively doing as much physics as friends of mine who were doing physics degrees, as much chemistry as people who are doing chemistry degrees, and as much biology as people who are doing biology degrees. So they do cram it all in. Oh, yeah. But that was a fabulous kind of platform, and I honestly don't think I would be doing the type of work that I'm doing now without that interdisciplinary baseline, because everything we do now, is using physics and lasers, to understand literally individual molecules at a chemical molecular level, but in order to better understand biology and so it really brings it all together.
That's really interesting. And then what was your PhD in?
So the PhD, I stayed in Cambridge, and I mean, if I'm honest, I stayed because I was just having a great time. I was doing a lot of rowing, I was doing a lot of violin playing, I was doing a lot of singing, and I was having a really good time, and I just I'd not had enough of being a student yet, if I'm honest.
Wow.
So I was just like, well, I did a 4th year project in Sophie Jackson's lab in protein folding, actually. So this is trying to understand, trying to understand how a protein goes from its individual sequence of amino acids in one contiguous kind of polypeptide chain. How does it go from that to its fully functional 3-dimensional structure, which is what confers its function? Yeah. And so now, obviously, this is some of the structure prediction piece of that has been solved largely now by AlphaFold, which is fantastic. Exactly. So absolutely brilliant. It hasn't, strictly speaking, solved the folding problem. It doesn't tell you how you get from this to this, but it does at least tell you what the end point is very well, actually, in many cases. And there's still some edge cases where it's interesting bits, but yeah.
It might be just good because people may not understand why protein folding is so important, what it decodes, what are the possibilities if we can get there.
Absolutely. So the way that your body works, you have your DNA in your cells, which is made up of your 4 letters, A, T, C, G, right? Yeah. And then each of those, 3 at a time, they write words, effectively codons, we'd call them. So, if any individual sequence of those letters actually codes for 1 amino acid in a protein, of which there are 20. These are then the building blocks of the proteins. And so the DNA, actually there's an intermediate step, the RNA, but don't worry about that. But, the protein is made up of these individual amino acids. And then the order of those amino acids is all that's required, almost magically, right? But not science, but to define the 3-dimensional structure of the protein. Now, which is where the protein gets its function from. Now, what's so important is that actually there are a lot of diseases where the protein doesn't fold to its correct function. And many of the diseases actually that our instrument's starting to look into as well are important for this. So a lot of the dementias are resulting from proteins misfolding to the wrong shape, and then they start to stick together, to aggregate. So when you look at the brains of people with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, they have these plaques on the brains, and these are literally globs of protein that all got in the wrong shape, they folded up incorrectly, and they've all stuck together in these aggregates. And so being able to understand how that happens, why that happens, at the molecular level is really, really critical.
Yeah, I truly believe we're living in one of the most exciting periods in history, because we will decode so many diseases, we will understand causation, and then from causation, of course, comes cure and reprogramming this stuff. So it's really interesting. So from your PhD, what did you do then?
So I finished my PhD. It took a little longer than I might have hoped because I was having too much fun playing my violin and other bits. I went to, my first postdoc was a postdoc in St Andrews. In my PhD, I've been lucky enough to work quite closely with Dave Klenneman on the single molecule side of things. So that kind of got me into that. But also, it was also an interesting kind of very beginning look at how people spin things out, because he and Shankar Balasubramanian had spun out Solexa, which was then bought by Illumina and turned into this massive DNA sequencing company, right? So I was in touch with people who were doing interesting things in that space, if you like, and that will become a bit of a recurring theme, I think, through my career, as you'll see. So I then but I'd worked with Dave and his team, but I was more on the kind of the protein purification and thinking about the problem side rather than the method of doing single molecule work. And so my first postdoc with Carlos Pineda in St Andrews was then, I was his first postdoc, so I went there to help him build his lab to do single molecule experiments. And that was my first real hands-on, let's build something to look at these things one molecule at a time.
And then you went to Yale.
I did. So I got a fellowship, a Lindemann Trust fellowship, thank you guys, to go to Yale. In fact, it was to go to any US institution for a year of your choosing. You had to obviously get agreement with the people you're going to. What I was able to do is tie this up with a longer position with Oxford. So Achilles Kapanidis, who I ended up working for in Oxford, who span out Oxford Nanoimaging, another interesting thing, right, which we'll get to. But I'd been in contact with him and saying, well, I've got this 1-year position that I could go and do something with, and I'd written it for a different academic, actually. He's still a good friend, thank you, David. But there was a bit of argy-bargy there. But anyway, in the end, it made sense to go to talk to Achilles and say, well, look, he wanted me to come to his lab for a chunk of time, but he had a collaborator at Yale, and so why didn't I go there for a year, learn everything they're doing, and then bring that back to Oxford? And that's what I did. So I went to work with Kathy Joyce at Yale on DNA polymerases, so on those molecules, those enzymes that actually do the copying of the DNA. And that was great. That was a nice progression from the work I was doing with Carlos, where this was my first interaction with looking at DNA protein interactions. And so there was a nice kind of sensible progression here. And it's always nice with hindsight, you can draw these very nice straight lines, right? But it's never like that. It's just those are the jobs you get, right? And then you make it work and you draw the bits that you want. But that was brilliant, actually. But I think there were two, so I learned a lot, obviously, about doing science. I think Yale, I learned a lot about just being around super excellent people. And that's true in every place I was at, in St Andrews, in Cambridge, in Oxford, in Bristol. Here, you're around fabulous people, and that really helps.
Did you notice any differences between working in the United States versus working in the UK?
Yeah, so there is this thing called an East Coast postdoc, right? Which, where people just work super hard, and they do work super hard. I think that, when Beth and I, my wife and I, took 10 days off at one point, it was just like, I'm sorry, what? And we went and did a bit of a sort of a second honeymoon and did sort of Vegas and the Grand Canyon, and then drove all the way up Route 1 in a convertible sports car, which was absolutely bloody awesome. Yeah. But so that's definitely different. I think there is it's hard to say. Is the ambition different? There is pressure. People feel more pressure. I'm not sure they necessarily get anything more done. There's definitely more pressure. I really enjoyed my year at Yale, but I was also really glad that it was kind of time limited, because it meant that not just that it was. I think if you know it's a year, you're able to kind of work extremely hard for a certain length of time, which may be beyond what would be sustainable, in any, do you know what I mean? And so having it time limited is quite interesting. But it also meant that we didn't have to engage with all of the politics and all of the rest of it, because we weren't making our home there. We were only ever visiting. Yeah. And I think that is an interesting concept, but for us that was important, because we got a little bit involved. We were involved in the local church, we were involved in lots of things, locally, but we were not. It didn't feel like we weren't selling ourselves and becoming American. Not that I love Americans.
I did that, yes. How did you end up in Sheffield?
So we did a couple of years. We did a year at Yale. We did a few years in Oxford with Achilles, and close to Hagan Bailey of Oxford Nanopore as well, and sort of saw a few of those bits. And Philip Kakura of Refine. Yeah. I did and then did a year in Bristol, but literally on day one of the job in Bristol was the deadline for an application for a lectureship in Sheffield. So I put that in, and I was like, we're happy in Bristol now. We've just moved. At this point, we've got 3 kids, so they're 5, 3 and 1. That's not quite true. They are 4, 2 and 0. We moved when Max was 5 days old.
Wow.
That was fun.
Wow.
And yeah, fun is an interesting term for that. Yes, that was, yeah. We had 3 different, it's funny, I've not thought about it for a while, which is probably what your brain does for these sorts of things, but we had 3 different hospitals on speed dial, probably 4 actually. I think we had Oxford where we were, we had Bristol where we might be, we had Southampton where my parents are and we could reasonably be, and then we had, something halfway in between all of them.
Just in case.
Quite, yeah.
What were you doing in Sheffield?
So in Sheffield, they offered me the job to start my lab, and that was the critical thing. That was why we moved here. So in 2016, we came up to start Craggs lab, or what was going to become my lab, and it was great because they really believed in what I wanted to do in terms of the single molecule approaches that I wanted to use, and I was very upfront in the interview with them and said, look, it's great that if you do want to bring me here and you're excited about the work I'm doing, but if that's true, you're going to have to give me enough money to build the things that are going to allow me to do those experiments, because there's no point in bringing me here and then just not giving me the resource to do that. So I think, so one way or another, it's very different days and times, right, in terms of the university sector at that point, but they were able to give me a really decent startup, which allowed me to then build the first of our single molecule instruments, which ultimately became the prototype, actually, the V0, if you like, of what we later went on to commercialise.
Did you know when you came here that you wanted to commercialize it? Did you know you wanted to spin it out at some point?
So what I knew was that I wanted to spin something out, or that I was always had, 5% of my brain in every experiment I was doing at any point in time, and I think everybody should do this in the lab or whatever you're doing, have just always be thinking, could there be commercial aspect or commercial exploitation for what I'm doing right now? Because if you don't think it all the time, you'll miss the 1 in a million things that it actually is going to be that, right? So that's the thing for me. So I didn't know that I was going to do what it was going to be, but I hoped that there would be something that would allow us to do something like this.
What was the trigger where you said, right, I'm going to spin this out? What was the moment?
That's really interesting. So when I took the initial idea we built this instrument for a fraction of the price of what you could buy at the time, for this sort of thing, I took this to our tech transfer office, and their initial response was, nah, this is not a business. This is not something that can do anything. And they weren't wrong, in fairness, but what they couldn't do, or would have loved them to have been able to do, is to ask 1 or 2 helpful questions that would have made what I had then into what we've got now immediately, right? So we weren't there, but we were not very far off, and we could have got there very quickly. So it took a little bit longer.
What were those questions, out of interest?
Well, I think it was, it was like, well, they said things like, well, if this is just one product, that's not a company. And they're not wrong, right? I don't necessarily. One product isn't a company, right? But equally, it's like, well, and this product it wasn't yet a product, right? It was still sprawling on an optical table, although it was slightly more compact. It still needed to be in a laser-safe environment, right? It wasn't on the benchtop and operating with the lights on and all of this kind of stuff. But so there were a few key things. But ultimately, the thing that they liked when we kind of thought about it was, well, maybe we could make something that was a bit modular, that could have different configurability. And that's still a part of what we've got, but it's not the thrust, actually. The thrust of what we've got really is that democratization, which you mentioned in the intro. And I think that's actually really important, because my response to the TTO office saying, well, this is not going to be commercial, was, fine, we'll go full tilt in the other direction. And it pretty much was that kind of reaction. We published everything, completely open source, all of it, right?
Wow.
The entire lot, which our patent attorneys are now, super excited about, or as you could imagine. But actually, we have found useful things in the journey from V0 to V1, which are absolutely patentable. But to be fair, the aim still then was of democratization. And our idea at that point was, how do we get what we've done into the hands of the most people?
So how long did it take you from that meeting with the IP transfer office to spinning out? How long was that process?
It's an interesting question. So I think probably the initial conversations with them were maybe in 2018, the beginning processes, and then so it wasn't until 2021 when we officially launched the company. But we'd already been working on things, towards that for a couple of years.
So in 2018, you think you could have done it in what if you'd have sort of been asked the right
I think
question?
2019 could have been 2021. Yeah, wow. I think we might have lost a couple of years.
Wow.
But it's hard to say, because of the ideas evolve, the whole thing, we grew a lot in what we were doing and how we were doing it, and the people that we had in the lab, and, because it's all, ultimately it's about people, right? Every job.
And how did you fund the company? What did you, to spin it out, what did you...
So initially we got financing from the university and from Research England, so we got some grant funding, this CCF Northern Triangle innovation money, which was really, really helpful. We got a loan from the university, a convertible note sort of thing, to employ our first person, which was super exciting. And we also had the support of a local venture builder who's no longer in existence now, but that was super. And from them, we actually got my co-founder Rob Bell, and that was absolutely essential, right, for this. And Rob is a key part, an essential part of all the exciting instruments became. But ultimately, we actually funded the first 3-4 years of the company through bootstrapping, right? We sold the instrument before we'd built it, even for hardware, because we had the V0, right? So we could run demos of what the data will look like on the final instrument. The physics was all the same. So we were comfortable with going, here's how it's going to look, right? Which we did. And so we'd sold 2 before we'd built one that was ready, literally on the benchtop, ready to go out the door. We hoped we could do it, right? But at this point, there was also added pressure because this is when we'd taken, personal guarantees on the founders' houses, right?
You must have really believed in this. You must have.
Well, I think that we knew it was. There were a few phrases. Rob had this wonderful phrase. It's like, are we breaking the laws of physics? If not, we're fine, right? And I love that because I think that sets the bar, right? There are things that are impossible, but as long as we're not actually doing anything impossible, we can do it. And that speaks to the drive that is the very heart of everything we do at Exciting Instruments, right? I think that's really key. I think we'd already done it, in inverted commas, in the sense of we knew that these types of measurements were doable. We'd built a piece of kit that could do it, and now we just needed it miniaturizing and on the benchtop so that it could go to the customer. But it was pretty hairy, and there's a very, very famous text in our, the folklore of the Exciting Instruments, I guess, from Mahmoud Abdulhamid, my postdoc, who was helping us build this instrument. It's about 11:20, mid-June, and it just says, "You can sleep now, Tim," because there is literally there is the screen grab of the single molecule measurement, the first single molecule measurement on the flex, and it was a very special moment, and I'd been really worried by this point because we promised this to customers. We'd got POs in that we'd borrowed. That's how we'd leveraged the.
So you factored them, did you? Or?
We'd borrowed against the PO effectively.
Wow.
And that, but with the houses as collateral. Oh. So we really had to make this work. Yeah. I'd been at Mass that day as a Catholic. I'd been at Mass that day, and it was hilarious. I mean, really incredible. The reading, the gospel was, come to me, all who are ever heavy laden, and I will give you rest, right? And then I get this, and literally the message from Mahmoud later on, you can sleep now, Tim.
How did you feel?
Because it was all done. I was elated and relieved in equal measure. And I think it's an interesting one. I think it's always actually more relief than celebration a lot of my life these days, I think. And it's weird because we've achieved a massive amount, but also we put ourselves under that pressure all of the time that there is no other option, right? And I think that's part of the founder life, if I'm honest. I think you create the situation where you've got to succeed, and so you do.
Well, you see, to be an entrepreneur, I think you have to be prepared to take risks that virtually nobody in their right mind would do. And at the same time, be so optimistic that you can achieve something that is bloody hard. And what you were doing was both. And that really is the definition of entrepreneurship. That is what founders have to be. You have to be prepared to take risks and be the eternal optimist that we can do this. Your house is on the line. Wow. I mean, that's really taking a risk.
It was our second house.
Okay.
But yes, but it's
still,
real.
It's your
still
personal...
a chunk of cash, right?
Yes.
There's a massive amount of money there. The risk is there, and the risk is real. Yeah. And it is. You're absolutely right that. And I think people sometimes forget that definition of entrepreneurship. I was recently elected a member of the Bessemer Society, and it reminded me in the pitch that I had to give for them. What is entrepreneurialism? It is taking risk for financial building of a company, right? It's taking personal risk is a key part of that process.
So I'm always fascinated with academics that become entrepreneurs, because the two disciplines are somewhat at odds with each other. One is a very relatively comfortable, safe, slow-moving environment. The other is the antithesis of that. How did you mentally make that transition?
That's interesting. I think I would challenge that view to a certain extent. I think that there are aspects of certainly science, academic science, which are extremely cutthroat, extremely fast-moving, extremely competitive. I also think that starting a lab, if you do it well, is like starting a small company. You've got yourself as the founder, and you're going to bring in people to do things. You've got to build a team. You've got to build culture, right? You've got to have a vision. You've got to get money, right, to do that. You are right that the risk element is not there in the same way.
No.
But the done well, and in certain circumstances, there is that pressure to do it well. That said, the ultimate aims are very different, and that's really the shift, the mindset shift, which is important, I think. And although there are similarities, I think that in science, ultimately, you're looking to really understand something new, and in innovation is how do you apply that knowledge? How do you turn that research into cash? Right, and I think so. In some ways, people talk about so universities turn cash into knowledge, and the job of the business is innovative businesses is to turn knowledge into cash.
Yeah.
Right, and so there is a mirroring of it, but it's a different thing, and it means you have to frame questions differently, because where do you focus in science? You might focus on what is the biggest. You should focus on what's the hardest question, what's the most interesting question, what's the most pertinent question I can answer. In business, you've got to go, where is the most return on my investment? Where's the biggest bang for my buck? Now, it's actually not such a different sort of question, but the parameters that you're working with are clearly different.
You know the kind of conversations we have here, honest, ambitious, and focused on what's really shaping the future of UK industry. Now, imagine taking them even further. That's exactly what the Digital Forge membership is about. This isn't just another network, it's a proving ground where connection, knowledge, and opportunity collide. As a member, you'll unlock exclusive events and curated networking with serious builders, a private community platform for real-time support, and a content and knowledge hub packed with insights you won't find anywhere else. Plus, you'll gain access to exclusive discounts and the chance to learn directly from mentors and seasoned founders who've already walked the path. Everything we do is built on trust, clarity and intent. No noise, no theatre, just the right conditions for progress. So if you're ready to join the future of UK industry and step into a community built to accelerate growth, join other members at forgedforgrowth.com.
So let's talk a little bit about what Exciting Instruments does. So we're not all molecular scientists. So can you put in simple terms what you guys are doing?
Absolutely. So what our instruments enable on the benchtop in any lab, which is really important from that democratization perspective, is the detection of literally one molecule at a time. And why that matters is, if we come back to our protein folding example, molecules can exist in different shapes, different conformations. And so if you've got, a protein, say, that half the time is in an open conformation and half the time is in a closed conformation, well, when you do a normal experiment, an ensemble experiment in a test tube or in a cuvette or something like that, we've got many hundreds of millions of billions of molecules in there, half of them in one shape, half of them in the other shape. The answer that you're going to get is halfway between the two. Well, how many of your molecules were in that shape? None. You're just wrong, right? And so it's really important. What our instrument does is it goes literally molecule by molecule, one at a time, and goes, right, okay, you're in that, you're open to get that information, great. Next one kind of diffuses through the volume. What shape are you in? Oh, you're closed, great. And you build up, these histograms of what shape each molecule is, because you're able to detect them one at a time. And that's really the critical aspect of it.
So if your product didn't exist, what would one have to do?
So there are other instruments out there that can do this and have been before, and so we're not the first into that space. I would argue we are going to be the best, of course, as is often the case to these sorts of things. So you could buy a very expensive piece of kit, but it's also very hard to use. And a number of people across pharma and even academia, they don't buy these things because they needed to be an expert. They couldn't justify on a grant that they would be able to operate.
How much are we talking about?
Maybe 400, 500, 600K, right? Wow. So that's the sort of what we were trying to do is so in terms of democratization, for me that means a few different things.
Yeah.
One is it's got to be affordable for a wider user base. So price is important, but what we're not talking about is a race to the bottom here on price. No one's going to win that, and that's not a commercially viable route forward.
No.
What the critical thing for me that democratization is ease of use, right? And so you don't need to be the professor. When we've talked to Tom James at AstraZeneca and a few others there, they could afford to buy a big expensive piece of kit that has to go in a later controlled room and all the rest of it. But if they needed a professor to run it, it's not going to work for them, right? So it's about ease of use. It's about making it so straightforward. And actually that's something that, having had that experience in the lab, in lots of different labs as well, but only in my own lab with my own students as well, I solved a problem I had, right? And I think that's really important from an entrepreneurial perspective, a founder perspective as well. I built something that I knew I needed that solved a problem I had. And then the question was, well, how many other me's are there? Well, actually quite a lot.
So for a competent scientist in this field, how quickly can they be up and running with your product?
So when we ship them now, it comes in a crate. 10 a.m. it's out of the crate. 3 p.m. on the benchtop, they're getting single molecule data.
Wow.
Yeah, so that day, it's super fast. And in fact, we have people come now in our new premises at Pennine 5, which is fabulous. We do demos for people. They bring their samples and they just get the data on the day, and they get it processed automatically in the cloud, and they get their answers.
And how does that compare to the alternatives?
So I think that again, it's about that ease of use stuff.
Yeah.
So there is the rapid turnaround in simplification of the experiment, but also of the processing of the data analysis is really critical there. And again, you don't want people to have to. What's critical is that to code a load of stuff themselves. You need some really well structured workflows and it's kind of that 80-20 rule that we work to all the time, right? Where you just go, look, we're going to build something that's going to really be useful for 80% of what people want to do. There are always going to be edge cases, but we are very focused on that 80%.
One of the things that I've always found interesting from talking to you about Exciting Instruments is it reminds me so much of Amazon Web Services, who started out selling to academia and then went to the more commercial world. And that seems to me what you guys have done. So just talk to me about who your customers are currently and where you're moving to.
Absolutely. So that is a fairly well-trodden path for life science tools companies, right? So what you do, we've sold into academia. We've done well over 2 million in revenue into academia now, and a bunch of that was in our bootstrap phase as well. So that was part of the traction that enabled us to raise the funds, right? And that's good because that's a world I knew as an academic as well. So there's a lot of reasons why that works, but it also means that you're gaining credibility with expert users, people who can vouch for it, key opinion leaders in the space. And that's what you need to then make that shift into pharma and biotech. And we're now having those conversations. We've actually got a V2 instrument which we're going to be launching towards the end of this year, which is brilliant, which now allows a higher throughput. So it takes a 96 well, 384 well plate rather than just a single spot. That's awesome. And so there's things like that, those sorts of innovations which help us get into pharma as well.
Do you feel like you've, in this phase where you've been dealing with academia and selling in academia, do you feel like you've been finding product market fit so that you can move to that next phase, making those improvements, making it easier to use?
I think that's right. I think we're at a point now where we've got product market fit in academia, but for our first product, I think we're now ramping out, sort of more consumable and assays in that space as well, which will produce that recurring revenue, which will be really important for us going forward as a company. And what that's done as well is it's just given us runway because we have revenue that has allowed us, to raise the funds that we need to really expand, but also to then do that slightly longer research piece of the development of the next instrument and the assays and how to really get into to pharma and biotech.
So I'm really interested in some of the use cases and what you think this might enable in the world in a second, because I love things that can change the world, which I think this can. When you went to venture,
yes,
did they understand it? That's a very broad, very leading question.
Yeah, I think I learnt. Everybody learns a lot when you start pitching.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the first pitch I gave, I looked at it the other day actually. And it was, oh my word, it was horrible. Oh my word, it was horrible.
All text, no pictures.
So but it was all about. I was talking about all the wrong stuff. I was talking about science.
Yeah.
We don't. Why? The question isn't. Do they? It's interesting. Their job as venture is not to understand the science. That isn't their job, right?
That's right.
Actually, the pitch that the one question that an investor needs an answer to is, how am I going to turn their 1 into 10?
Right. Yeah.
Or 100 or 1,000, right?
Yes.
How are you going to return the fund? That's the question. And how can they get conviction, is a big word they like, right? Conviction and confidence that you've got all of the bits in place that has a, maybe whatever it is, a 1 in 20 chance of actually happening. So that's the question. I think it took me a long time actually to work out how, what the question is you need to answer when you're actually preparing a pitch deck. What's the exam question, right? And actually it took a while. We went out initially, and so to answer the question in a slightly different way, I guess still, but was they didn't get what we were doing, or we didn't present what we were doing in a way that was actually understandable or told the story that they needed to see. So actually, it was only really when we went on an accelerator. We went on the Deep Tech accelerator, run out of Cambridge Deep Tech Labs accelerator, as part of NG Studios. We were one of the first cohort in that, and we learnt. We were very cocky. We didn't think we had anything to learn. Nothing. We literally thought, look, we'll do this because NG have said that we should do this, and they are keen to invest and lead around Northern Gritstone. This is, so we'll do it. We'll humour them, and we went in and thinking we were going to raise like $1 million or 1.2 million or something. We came out with having really honed our narrative, right, and with a 4 million oversubscribed round, right. So that was transformational.
And what was the change from when you did that first pitch to raising 4 million quid?
Well, it's not one thing, is it? I think overall, the biggest, there are 3 things there, and I said this at the NG Investor Day as well. One is narrative, really nailing the narrative, right? Over and above anything else, though, it's the ambition. It's like actually what's possible, what's actually possible here, and then it's the focus, and they're all related. You can't really disentangle them. But it was really, there was one central slide that really helped, and that was really where we were able to define in one slide. We have academia, pharma and biotech, and diagnostics. And we're like, okay, in academia, we've done 1.5 million already in revenue. We're selling to these people, and the market is this big, right? Yeah. In pharma, we're speaking with all these people already. We've already done that bit. Now we're going to be, with this money, we're going to be expanding into pharma and doing the next bit here. And we've got, these are the steps we're going to take. And then ultimately, our technology can also be used in diagnostics, which is what we'll come on to.
So what is possible with your technology? What could it enable?
So it's already enabling people to do cutting-edge research that wasn't previously possible in their labs, right? So something that was, the purview of maybe 20, 30 elite labs around the world can now be used in over 20,000 labs around the world.
Wow.
So that's massive, right? And we've now got, we're nowhere near that number of units out there yet, but we'll get there, right? Yeah. We will get there.
Yeah.
But that's really important. And the sorts of work they're doing, again, it's understanding cancer biology, it's understanding DNA protein interactions, it's understanding protein folding and misfolding. It's all of these things that will be transformational, for our understanding of human health and well-being. So that's good. The next stage in pharma is both in terms of understanding how drugs operate. Which shape of protein does my drug bind to? Well, and how does that change things? Right? Well, being able to see that at the single molecule level is essential, right? But also, now one of the really interesting things is that one of the other methods it enables allows us to look at these protacs and molecular glues, the drugs that can drug the undruggable is the phrase, right?
Wow.
Where you've got targets that are really hard, but that you can use the internal cellular machinery to actually break up the target protein and things like that. So we've got an assay we're developing in that space, which is going to be transformational. But the ones that the diagnostic piece, which I think is really interesting, is, the point is with single molecule detection, either the molecule's there or it isn't. So you are kind of at the limit of detection, right? What if that molecule you detect is the first molecule of a cancer biomarker, not the stage 3 tumour, right? What if that molecular event that you detect is the first aggregation just of two proteins coming together, right, forming a dimer, not the plaque on the brain in dementia? That's the real excitement, and that's where we move beyond what's a really fabulous business opportunity, which it is, but to also something that really we feel we have a moral obligation, because there is an opportunity that this technology, used and developed correctly, we could eradicate symptomatic dementia from the planet.
Wow. That's really cool. I mean, that is pretty incredible. And from your little machine that sits on a desktop, it's interesting when you do democratize. I mean, somebody made the point to me the other day that everybody, the richest people in the world's iPhone is the same as my iPhone and your iPhone, and everybody else has got an iPhone. There's no difference. So information is really democratized. What you're doing is really what the iPhone's done. All that compute power in everybody's pockets, we're doing the same thing for single molecule technology. Unbelievable. Wow. So it could cure, eradicate, as you put it, many of the world's diseases that we know today.
So I think that one of the key, in combination with obviously everything else that's gone on, right? This is not a silver, there are no immediate individual silver bullets. Yeah. But I think that especially in cancer space and in dementia space, right, early diagnosis is critical. And that's where the focus has moved to, right? Because if you can catch things, we know how to treat a lot of these diseases. It's catching things early enough, right? We have already got, especially in the dementia space, there are drugs that can slow down progression, right? We haven't got drugs that are curative, but we have got things that will slow down the progression of the disease. Well, if you could catch the fact that disease is 15 years out from being symptomatic even, rather than catching it only when people are symptomatic, that would be absolutely transformational, even given the current drugs that we've got. So things like that, I think, there really is again, that moral obligation to try, and not just to try, but to achieve.
It's just incredible that this is in Sheffield. I mean, because, you know, we all think this should be in San Francisco Bay Area, you know, or in London, but it's actually happening here, which is just so fantastic. So this business could be pretty big if you can do these things, or help to do these things. How do you think about scaling? And I should have asked you earlier, but how do you think about your product? How much is hardware and software, and how do you think about that? Are you a software company, hardware company, both?
Yeah, I look at this point, we are very much a life science tools company, which is a hardware product. The software is absolutely integral to that. There is no immediate big data play in terms of the instrument itself, but actually, you know, once you're getting into the drug screening space and other things, the software is essential, because you need to provide to to pharma. It's got to be an end-to-end solution, and not just then the software and the hardware, but the wetware, the actual science that goes on top of that. And that's why I think we're well placed to do this, and that speaks to that multidisciplinarity that we talked about right at the beginning. So I think that's a key part of it. I mean, but doing it in Sheffield, look, this is where we are, and this is where the support has been fantastic. You know, the combined mayoral authority has got behind us, the university has got behind us to help us. You know, Digital Forge and other startup. There is a really growing and vibrant, and I would say it's kind of emergent, right? That it's by no means mature, the ecosystem here, right? And there's a lot of work for us to do there, and we're keen to play our part in that, as well as at a round table yesterday with the mayor and others talking about the life science growth plan, things like this. We want to be actively involved in helping, you know, that rising tide lifting all boats, you know.
So just before we go into the ecosystem around here, how many people are you today? How many people do you think you're going to be next year, and how many people do you think you're going to be in 5 years? And what do you think your growth is going to look like?
Yes, it's a really interesting question. So until about August last year, we were about 2.5 people.
Wow, jeez.
Yeah.
You've built this with 2.5 people?
Pretty much. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And then we closed, you know, and bits and bobs of people here and there, 3 months here, 3 months there, right? 4 people tops, right, at any one time. November, we closed the 4 million round, so we were then hiring from kind of January, February on. We're now 12, so we've gone from 4 to 12 in about 6 months, you know, from when we started the hiring.
And
process.
hiring, have you found it?
I've really enjoyed it. I know, but also, do you know what? We've been really lucky to hire absolute A-star quality people, and to be able to attract those people. And a lot of them, some of them are Sheffield-based already. Our lead marketing person, right, for example, was working for a startup remotely, but she was working from Sheffield for a startup in London, and now she's working for us, and she's brilliant, right?
How many did you know before? Did they apply? Were they
That's
referrals?
a really good question. So 1 or 2 have come from our network. So I've got Stefan Muller, who'd come from he's literally relocated from Australia to come work for us as one of our assay development scientists. So we have got that global reach. Others we've used recruiters for key roles. So Paul, our CCR, Chief Commercial Officer, we've used a recruiter for, but he's come from life science tools all the way through his life, and is just brilliant. And so really bringing in absolute top talent into that C-suite level, that's been really, really important as well.
Do you think if you needed to be 100 people, say, in 3 years, do you think you've got the infrastructure ready to go to do that?
So I think that's a really interesting question. I think that part of the challenge of the geography here is physical infrastructure, actually.
Yeah.
I think we're really happy with the fit out, and again, this was funded through the investment zone money through Simco. We got 250k there, which was brilliant to help us. And you've been actually, it's a fabulous facility, isn't it, that we managed to build from scratch, which is excellent. And we have space in there to grow to 30. We've got options on floors as well to get maybe to take us to, that could feasibly take us to 90 maybe. But I think this is a big question. But that said, then you've got things like the Olympic Legacy Park. There are other pockets of things starting to come. The new runway park, things like that. But what we need to do is to really make sure that there is really obvious defined graduation routes, through these types of infrastructure, and make sure they really are available.
So you've received good support from the city. You've mentioned the Simca, the mayor of South Yorkshire, his office have been very supportive. Obviously, the University of Sheffield.
Yeah. And
there does seem to be, just talking about the ecosystem here, a growing fertile startup community that is building here. It does feel like that, and it means hopefully that you'll be able to scale and stay in Sheffield.
That's certainly our hope, right? And so yes, I agree with you. I think there is a growing startup community. I think the driven by both universities as well, but certainly UniOf Andy Hogburn is really should give him a shout out, because I think he's transformed how the university thinks about commercialization. Yep. I think they've kind of modelled a bit of that on us, which is great. Been brilliant, right? But and others as well before us. Opteran and a couple of other big success stories. EGIC as well. We've talked about a little bit. So there are a few good examples, but they've increased the number of spin-outs enormously over the last few years, which I think is important. So that is happening. And look, we would love, as we say, one of the things we're trying to build a global business from the heart of Sheffield, and not just trying. We are, we're selling in the US, we're selling in Europe, we're selling in the UK, we're soon to expand into Asia. So it's already happening. We are absolutely doing it. And the conversations we're having with local government, with national government as well, is how do we support those industries? How do we retain those industries? This is ultimately a broader question for government as well, because as you're well aware, it's all in getting 4 million here, 10 million there, but if you're really going to support massive global companies, we're talking about massive amounts of investments that's required, and really helping to unlock those really chunky amounts of money later on. And that ultimately is why many companies exit to the US, is because that's literally where the money is, and that they have more of an appetite for that and are able to do it.
Well, the frustrating thing is that 95% of UK pensions are invested in US equities, so we're basically funding US companies to acquire UK companies. It's ridiculous. It is insane, and that has to change. And this is, people say to me all the time, but in the US, there's so many more things to invest in. What a load of claptrap. Just look at this company. Look at what you're building here. This is one of the most sophisticated, interesting companies. In fact, I was going to ask you, Blue Sky, how far can you go? What is the, assuming perfect execution, how big can this thing be?
This can be huge. Yeah. This can be absolutely colossal, right? This is not just a life science tools company, but this you could expand. You could have individual, it's back to those three kind of pillars of our different customer segments, right, and sectors. But you could absolutely have different divisions of the company in each of those areas, and you could roll out 20 different drug assays. You could roll out 30 different diagnostics tools. It's people, time, cash.
Well, this is exactly what our pension funds should be funding, which is great UK innovation. Just before I let you go, some quick fire questions. So, one word to describe Sheffield's innovation community.
Growing.
The best advice you received as a founder.
Oh, that's not one word. That is something that I got from Yale, actually. So Kathy Joyce, my advisor there, just said, look, it's great that you want to be collaborative, but you've got to be, why is anyone going to work with you? And she said, look, unless you're the best in the world at something, then no one's going to work with you. So be the best at something and focus on that, focus on your strengths, and then also have the humility to know when you're not the best at something, because that's when you need to collaborate with someone who is.
Favourite place in Sheffield to get perspective?
So we live quite close to Graves Park, and just running around there or walking there, going there with my 1-year-old and the ducks, yeah.
And I suspect to know the answer to this, but if you weren't building exciting instruments, what would you be doing?
That stumped me, that. I think I live and breathe what we're doing so much. I can't imagine not doing this now. I think that there would have been something else, right? There would have been a different part of the research. I'd be building something, whether it was this, or not. This is the thing that came first.
I suspect you might be a professional musician. If you'd have gone down the different
If I'd gone down the music road, that's possible. I think I might have done some violin playing or some singing. I was never quite as good at the singing as the violin playing. It's all good fun.
I've got to say, Tim, it's I've spoken to you many times, but you've just blown me away today. So that's Tim Craggs, CEO and founder of Exciting Instruments. Just the resilience and belief in Tim's journey was just astonishing to me, from using his house as collateral to keeping the company alive, growing sales before raising capital, and now leading a global science business from, I have to say, I'm really proud to say, here in Sheffield. You can invest in the north of England, everybody. Exciting Instruments shows how world-class research can be commercialized with huge potential impact, not just for one industry, but for human health. If you'd like to learn more, you can find Exciting Instruments online and on LinkedIn. And if you enjoyed this episode of Digital Forge, please share it, leave us a review, and subscribe so you don't miss future conversations. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time at the Digital Forge.
What if your aligner system could drive more profit for your dental business? With PureTech Clear Aligners, our AI-powered software delivers instant smile previews. Our custom aligners, proudly made in Sheffield, arrive in just days, not weeks. Patient wait times are reduced with localised labs, and our revolutionary technology offers smoother workflows, higher conversions and happier patients. Be part of the future of aligner care. Start your pilot today at puretech.ai. PureTech Aligners. Smile brighter, smile sooner.